Good evening, everybody. It's Thursday, the 14th of March, 2024, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar with Julien Violette, Raising Attainment at GCSE, Tackling the Productive Skills. Particularly relevant at the moment as we're preparing our students for the GCSEs. I'm going to be doing a lesson tomorrow with a class on writing. So my name is Helen Myers. I'm chair of the London branch of the Association for Language Learning. I'd be very keen to know those of you who are here already, and I'm sure others will be joining later on, who's already a member. Please say you're a member and encourage others to join. Julien is a member. We've got loads of teachers from the Harris Federation who are members, and we are really, really grateful to the Federation for being so generous in supporting us and coming along and giving us information as you are tonight. Thank you. So we do have webinars, and there's a QR code. You can see lots of other webinars. I think we've had, I don't know, about 180 webinars you can find. And they're coming soon. We're now up to the next event that we've got timetabled is the June event, which is definitely going ahead on June the 15th. I'm sure that we'll be doing some more webinars in between that time. So do have a look. So we have an etiquette. We're professional, we're kind, and we always have to do a little disclaimer just to say we're happy to host speakers and participants free of charge, and everybody's responsible for what they say and display. So last week we had an amazing session, wonderful, with Julien, and I think Julien and Mathilde, you co-write these presentations, and it was wonderful. We had lots of very good feedback, and I thought I've been teaching for decades, and there were so many ideas that I thought, oh, I hadn't thought of that before, so thank you. And last week it was about the receptive skills, listening and reading. And there's Mathilde, who gave us the presentation and very generously shared what she did. And there's a QR code. You can go onto our website and you can see the PowerPoint. But tonight, really delighted that Julien is here, and he's going to talk about raising attainment at GCSE, tackling the productive skills. So there you've got the description of Julien, particularly delighted that he has supported ARR London for so long as well. So thank you. This is going to be a 90-minute session about raising attainment, tackling the productive skills. So I've put there as well that we've already got a page ready and waiting to be able to have a link to this recording, which will be hosted on my YouTube channel, and also anything that Julien shares. Already, he's very generously said that we'll be able to have a copy of what he's done. He's already sent me the PDF to go there. He is just so organised. So over to you, Julien.
All right, thank you very much, Helen, and thank you for hosting me tonight. I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share some of the work that we do with our teachers, because we are really privileged in Harris that we get to work, with over 200 teachers of languages. So today I want to follow up on what Mathilde did and present on tackling the productive skills. And very much like last week, if you attended, please ask your question at any time in the chat, and then I've asked Helen to interrupt me to just ask those on the spot so that I'm able to maybe try to answer your questions, or even if you have other ideas that I have not mentioned, please bring them along, because all I'm going to present today is things that I've taken from teachers. They're not mine, but they've inspired me, and I thought I would collect them all together to try to share with the network. So I'm going to work specifically on two different objectives for this session. First of all, identifying where there are strengths and weaknesses at GCSE in speaking and writing, and telling you how we do at Harris identify those, although I'm sure that what I'm going to share is not new to you, and these are things that you already do. And then much of the session will actually be focused on revisiting effective strategies that we use in our network of schools to try to improve speaking and writing for the real GCSE. But I do want to say, I do have a health caution for this session. And that's the fact that whatever I'm going to share tonight is practice that, yes, we're using right now, but it's because it's the final stretch. Some of it will sound like shortcuts to teaching, and it's not necessarily things that we wouldn't recommend that, for instance, at the start of the course, or as necessarily excellent teaching practice, because we know that teaching to exam is not the right way forward. But I think at this stage of the year where we're at, we do have to acknowledge that we have to take those shortcuts. So hopefully some of those that I'm going to present tonight, you will find useful. So that's my agenda for the meeting. First, I'm going to talk to you briefly about tiering, getting tiering right, because you probably have now done so. But I'm just going to share what we do every year to try to improve it. We tend to get it very wrong in our first mock in November. And then by this time, we've just completed the second mock. We tend to get it a lot better. So I'm going to share a little bit what we tell teachers to do to improve that. And then I'm going to share, as I said, strategies and what we use to identify where we get it right and where we get it wrong and what we need to solve. And I'll have some general recommendation following that. And then I'll take it one skill at a time. So first speaking, then some writing. And then I'm sharing resources that we've put together with my colleague Mathilde. It's a bespoke program that can be fitted into any curriculum of year 11 at this stage. It's an 8-week program for just tackling the skills with the students. And so we have so much resources available that I've made available as a PowerPoint, both in French and in Spanish for both skills. So that will be shared as soon as this meeting is finished. So I'm going to start with getting tiering right. And please, again, as I said in the chat, tell me how you do it yourselves. But we've been looking at tiers over the years because I'm going to be very honest with you. Last year, we got quite surprised by them. We got our grade boundaries for our mock wrong in the sense that we knew they would increase, but not at the pace that they increased last year. And it meant that our summer results were not as good as we expected. So this year, we definitely thought, okay, we need to go back to the tendencies that has happened in the last few years, and we need to try to anticipate better. So one, our grade boundaries for our mocks are more in line with what we will see in the summer. So you can see on my screen in here that I've got the very first series to this exam, the grade boundaries, and you can see that from 2018 to 2019, they went up as we expected, apart from grade 1. And then obviously COVID happened, so they went down for that series. But we knew last year, the exam board had told us that, Ofqual had recommended grade boundaries needed to go back up. So it did happen. And you can see on my screen, it hasn't yet happened to the extent that it was at in 2019. We're probably on par at the minute with the very first version of this exam. So what does it mean? First of all, it means that last year compared to 2022, students needed 15 more marks to get a 5 and 10 more marks to get a 4. And we had certainly not expected such a jump. So it meant that for us, we had a lot more grade 3s than we ever expected. But now we're trying to be more cautious, and we think that the benchmark at some point will resume and be 2019. So we're already looking at whether we should set our grade boundaries to that level again or halfway there. We know that the grade boundaries for this year will certainly not be lower than the 2023, but we also are expecting a slight increase. So wonder if that's what you've been doing as well in your schools, but we've been looking at that. So when I compare in here, you can see there's still potentially an additional 11 marks from the grade 5 if we wanted to reach, the level of 2019. So we've been preparing for that to make sure that if it's the case in 2014, we are actually expecting more of our students and getting more right as well when we mark and when we do mocks. So I've put that just for you to see. By the way, I'm presenting mostly AQA, and I apologize for any edXL schools because we don't work with our network in edXL. We'll be moving to edXL in the future years, but at the minute, that's the exam board we use. And so, yes, for French, if you look again for higher, so I've just presented you, apologies, I didn't mention that was for foundation, but here the same tendencies you can notice as well for higher with an increase as I've presented for foundation. Students last year needed on average 5 more marks to get the top grade. So that was fairly more what we expected, but they still needed 10 more marks for students to get either a 4 or 5. And that meant for us, we had more grade zeros last year because, again, of that huge gap. And so if we think that 2019 is going to be the next step forward, you can still see the huge gap we are currently with 2023 in comparison with 2019. So just for us, it was important to have that in our radar in case we see another increase in 2014. So according to that, we've made much more precise recommendation to our schools. And one thing that we've been telling them is that for us, writing is the biggest factor in tier decisions. We know that the writing paper is really, really not accessible to many of our students. So we need to only put our students into higher if they can really cope with the challenges of the writing. And then we recommend that the second biggest factor should be the speaking. So the question that we make all our teachers think is, can our students ably cope with the demand of both these papers? And if the answer is not certain or is a no, then we recommend to do foundation papers. So for instance, also what we've been recommended this year is if a student has a DFE target or a 4 and a 5, probably the safest options for them is to do foundation because they can really secure a 5 much more easily than they would in the higher papers. And then what we've been recommended following our mock 1 in November is if students got a U at that stage or a 3, then we recommended that they immediately change for mock 2 into foundation just to keep it safe and to get the tier more right. But obviously it's a case by case. You'll have students who perhaps didn't get the grade you expected because of different reasons that can impact our students, or they didn't complete all the papers. So it is not a final block on what we recommend. But it is really important for mock 2 to get tier right. And you want to really try to reach a 95% and above grade 1 at your mock 2. Otherwise, you're going to have to really reconsider your tiers significantly for the final entries. So moving on from tiers, what have we learned ourselves in the exams that took place last summer? And what I'm going to show you is obviously some of the data is from our federation. We're really lucky that AQA works really well with us to share data that is across our group, our group, and then we're able to compare that to national figures. So here, for instance, is what we learned from it. We had a really nice data report that was produced for us. And what we find out is that in speaking, our students were performing on average the same as national average, but our students across the trust were performing better in the photo. So we were really pleased because it meant we were getting it right when we were teaching students to describe photos. And then we realized that we were fairly on point with the national average in general concession, but slightly below. When it came to writing, then we saw that we were doing really what we were expected to do with the national average for the description of the photo. And to be fair, the national average is really high for that. So I believe I think it's a 6.8 out of 8 for the photo description. So we were pleased that we were doing that well. And then we realized that our students were performing significantly below, at least for our higher students, on the 150 word. So we knew this is where we needed to also put more work into. Finally, translation, and that has been a trend for us for a couple of years now. We perform less well than national average on the translation. So again, something in our radar. I need to correct myself because I'm showing you higher there. And question 1, obviously, as you all know, is not the photo description. So that was, we're performing on average with the national average for the 90 word. So when we got all of that, we summarized that to our teachers that we needed to continue practicing techniques with the role plays. We do perform on that with the alongside the national average. But we knew that from mock one, our students had not coped well with role play. It's usually the case in mock one anyway. And we knew that we needed to do better preparation for general conversation, because that's our goal and that's what the summer result taught us. For writing, we knew we had to improve performance at translation. And we also knew that probably what we need to get our students to buy into is to structure a plan before they write. And I find, I don't know what you feel in your schools, but this is the hardest thing to convince students to do. They just want to write straight away. And the problem is when they don't plan or follow guidance that we ask them to do before they start writing, they tend to commit a lot more mistakes than they could be able, or they would be able to not do if they had planned better. So general recommendations for going forward for us. I'm going to skip to that bit. But what we are looking at, we're learning for this year, but we're also planning for the long term. We know that it's not just about making the changes in year 11, it has to start earlier. So if we take what we learn from where we need to do better, we realize, first of all, that we need to put more focus on exam skills in year 11 and probably earlier than we do. So I don't know how your curriculum works in your schools, but for us, we really finish the whole full course by mid-January, and it's probably already too late. That's why our mock one, for instance, tend not to be that great. So this year, we were really, really reactive when we got our first mock, and that's why we created this bespoke exam-focused scheme of work, or an 8-week program, where we told teachers it's probably best at this stage that you cut half of your lessons into the content that still need to be taught, but you spend another half of those lessons really looking at skills in a lot more details than you otherwise do in your lessons. We also realize, and this is a long-term plan for us, we just need to change the way we do homework. And something that we want to start doing more is helping students memorize way before year 11. That's because, I'm going to be completely transparent to us. Many of our teachers across the trust still rely heavily on preparing students to general conversation through memorization. It's something I'm not going to lie about. It's something I do when I help students in school as well. It's just, there need to be some part that students can rely on that they've been able to learn. And then you expand, and then obviously you lead the conversation for it not to be just a pre-memorized conversation. But the reality is you will need that element. But the problem that we're finding is because we've never really asked our students before year 11 to memorize anything, when comes that time where we're telling them, oh, learn those chunks, learn those really excellent complex structures, they just don't have the skills to memorize. So we've realized that we need to teach from Key Stage 3 students to memorize passages. And I'm sure that you'll agree with me that in your own education, we've all had to go through reciting poems and text and other things. And I think it should be part of their learning. So we're thinking we need to train our students earlier so that when they're in year 11, they're not struggling with that. And then they'll do better straight from their first mock. But we know also that we need more exam tasks within our lessons, within how we prepare our students. And so something else we're looking at is preparing students earlier. We don't want year 9 to become a GCSE year. We know that in recommendations from Ofsted in the previous framework, because it's changing, but we know that they were not in favor of a 3-year stage. So that's not what we are recommended. However, there's nothing wrong with showing students what a general conversation booklet looks like, for instance, at their stage for the topics that they do, and making them prepare for it the way we would prepare year 10 and year 11. So that's what we've been looking at as well. And then something we're going to change this year, and it will be our first time really, is our last end of a year assessment for year 10. Previously, we have used exam papers. We heavily adapted them because we felt that one, students didn't have the full course, so they were not able to access everything, but also the jump from our own assessments to the exam paper was just too big. Now we've decided that actually, if we have a more robust and a closer exam at the end of year 10 than what they will have in year 11, it means that we could get tiering right earlier, so that we don't have so many students falling off a grade 3 in higher, for instance, in their mock 1, and we're having to heavily change the tiering. So that's what we are looking in our long term. But I'm really interested in finding out what you've also been implementing in your schools. So I'm going to pause there. Is there anything in the chat that has come up so far, Helen, before I start with speaking? Oh, actually, I have the chat here.
I was muted, sorry.
No worries at all.
People have been talking about when they do their mocks, that sort of thing. So they're sharing ideas about that. But I have to say, I think your ideas are really excellent there. As you say, we've got our current year 10, haven't we, who are still going to be going for this particular specification.
Exact.
All of these ideas are going to be valid for the new GCSE because the writing and the speaking is practically the same, isn't it?
Absolutely. All right. So I'm going to start with the main bit of today's presentation. And I'm going to look first at speaking. I'm going to look at the various questions across the speaking and elements throughout the questions that we've identified as area of improvement for us. They may not be areas of improvement for you guys, but I'm just going to share those tips. And again, I'd be really keen to hear your personal tips, because then I can take that back to my network of teachers and they'll benefit from it as well. So, first of all, in the chat, I'd like to invite you to tell me what you find are your most effective strategies to improve performance in speaking. What do you do that is really, really effective? And what are also your go-to tools or activity or resources that you find really impactful for preparing students for speaking, especially at this stage? Because let's be honest, many of our schools are going to start their speaking in about 5 to 6 weeks. So yes, if anyone wants to, I don't know, do we have also the opportunity to have people unmute, Helen, if they want to share their opinions?
Yes, definitely. If anybody would like to, that would be great.
Cool. So yeah, I'm going to leave that on, but please tell us in the chat or feel free to unmute to tell us what are your strategies and your go-to resources or activities that you use personally.
So Danielle says acronym and sentence starters for photocard task.
Yes, I mean, those I fully agree. They are such a game changer. So yes, I'll be showing very similar things as well. All right, so you can continue to tell us in the chat, and Helen, please interrupt me if there's any great ideas that should be shared with everyone. So first of all, for us, what we notice straight away is preparation time, and preparing students well for it is important. Mock 1, students make such a poor use of preparation time. It's not that we don't tell us, but I believe we don't model it well enough at Mock 1. So what I notice when I go in schools and do exams at that stage is 7 out of 10 to Mock 1 in front of me after their preparation time with an incomplete preparation. Why? Because first of all, they feel a lot safer with Photocard, so they start straight with that one. And then because they know how, they feel safe in that, they know how to do it well, they spend almost all their time on it. So I end up with 7 out of 10 students having spent the entire time on Photocard and having done nothing for the role play. But sometimes it's not just because they were so engrossed in the Photocard. Some students do disengage entirely with the role play because they simply don't understand the task. So I get out of those 7 students, there are students who just tell me, yeah, I didn't prepare this, I didn't know what to do. And so that already has a massive impact on their performance in Mock 1. And then the other part, when they are well prepared, they're still struggling with that because they will give you some answer incorrectly under pressure, despite having done the correct preparation. So now we are showing and modeling to our students how to teach them to use the preparation time effectively. And it starts by actually, first of all, exemplifying what it looks like and with a lot of visuals when we can. So we tell them in our trust, what we do is we say, you should spend 8 minutes on the photo. And the reason being is because that task requires developed answers, whereas the role play, which only requires 4 minutes because there's only 4 bullet points they can complete, and the answers should be short and simple. So 1 minute per bullet point is all they should spend on it. So we tell them 8 minutes for the photo cards. And this is how we cut it for them, because we really want them to be aware of not spending too much time on the things that they're already strong at, because otherwise we have students doing description of photos for about 4 minutes, when actually if they had stopped at 2 minutes, they already had the maximum ticks that I would give them anyway for the photo description. And also because actually the other 2 questions require a lot more effort from them, so they need to be spending more time for it. We do recommend that they spend at least 1 minute trying to anticipate the last 2 questions. That's because actually we can teach students to anticipate what they could get in those surprise questions. And then we do explain to students that details mean they need to have 3 verbs for each of those questions. So we tell them you need 9 verbs. You need to make sure you're counting them and you have enough detail for me. We also start telling them now, although we're not entirely sure it's true, but we have noticed last year that perhaps sometimes our photo description were marked a bit more harshly than previous years. So we're now encouraging our students to make sure those 9 verbs are as varied as possible. They're not repeating the same verbs over. So I've just explained that. Then we explain to them how to spend their time for the role play, about 1 minute per bullet, no more than that. But that's not where we stop to preparing students. We also explain them how to use the document a lot better. Because as I said to you, some students prepare really well, but when they come to you, you can see their preparation sheet is really messy. And because the exam is so stressful for them, that can be an issue, because they can start telling you answers that are not the right one at the right time. So we tell them always label the pages. We tell them to use both sides because it's a 2-sided page. We tell them to write role play at the front and then to number from 1 to 5. I don't come the bullet, and I've spoken to examples about stopping them, because the problem when students do points in their preparation is when they get lost in the conversation because my transcript is different to what they have, then they don't know where they're at with me. And I may have told them I'm going in order, but they're stressed. So they don't remember that. So we tell them from now on, don't do bullet points. So that when you're just left it. And that's really important. And if also they're not writing them in the right order, if they have a number next to them, they're not going to get lost with their questions. But another thing we're telling them to do is to look for the unprepared question, because it moves on the task. So we tell them to identify it and to write it on their prep, because what happens very often is students know it's unprepared, but they put nothing next to it. So then I ask it and they're stressed and they're reading me their answer for number 3. And then I have to interrupt them, but interrupting them is not always a good cue for them that they're doing wrong. Often they're just stressing even more and being like, what am I saying? And they get flustered. So we tell them you must put the question mark on there, because if you don't understand what's going on, you're looking back at your paper and you're realizing, oh, I'm not reading from my notes anymore. And that has made an impact for us. And then in the photo, we do the same thing. We tell them, annotate it so it's clear it's your photo card answers. Numbers from 1 to 5, leaving a lot bigger gaps for each of the first 3, putting 2 exclamation marks for the last 2 because they're unprepared, so you're not going to read anything from it. And that's this. So, and then we do a lot of that prep with them. And I've noticed, so I've just done speaking today, that our students had really good preparation sheet today, and it made an impact. I didn't have to interrupt any students and so on. So I highly recommend, if you're finding students struggling with reading their notes, model them in exercises. I'm going to move on and carry on with this time role play. I'm going to talk about improving the quality of the communication in response. What we're noticing is a barrier we have with our students is the bullet point language and the structures in there isn't clear. Half of my teachers tell me all the time, I don't even know myself what I should be doing for this. It's a task that we have to prepare significantly before because it's a lot more difficult. And I welcome the changes with the new GCSE because I think our students are going to do tremendously better in the role play. But the solutions that I'm going to present to you now is, first of all, preparing question word extensively. Students don't understand our bullet point process. Of the time, it's because they don't know their question word. And it doesn't matter how many times we've tried to drill them since year 7, sometimes they just don't get in. So we've been looking at new strategies to do that. And then I'm going to also talk about really encouraging students to use simple opinions, because for most bullet points, it works. And this is the one task where I don't mind that they give me 5 opinions, and I don't mind if it's repetitive, because I'm not really going to judge them on that. I just want them to communicate more clearly than if they were trying to say something different. First of all, and the resource now that I'm going to show you, by the way, those are the resources I have shared with Helen that are a PowerPoint that you will be able to take. There's hundreds of slides about it because it's an 8-week program. So all of that is available. But we've done, for instance, vocab sheets just such as this one for each of the tasks with the most common vocabulary. So that's just a help for our students to revise. We also use it to drill language. So we hope that they're going to remember it better when we do language acquisition or revisions. But this is the first stage. So I'm showing a Spanish example here. We know the questions words are not going in, and it's not by quizzing them and doing a matchup, it's just not going in. So what we decided to do with 11 is we don't have to reteach, to show them in how they look in a bullet point, and then making sure that we go through it with them. So this example of task is making students identify again and show us their knowledge of what the question words mean, and then identify the only answer for the role play that is acceptable. So you can see my first example. So it's club extraescolar, cuando, and then the only correct answer is obviously number 2, because it's the only time that they say when they go to a club. And so we have those conversations with, it works as a talk. They get about 20 seconds to talk to a partner, and then we go through the answers and we review why it doesn't work. We use fingers, sometimes we use meanwhile boards as well to do it for AFL, and then we explain why some answers would not be accurate for them and why they're not answering the bullet points. So that's the example in here. And we are finding that this has been quite helpful in making students understand better what sort of answers they're supposed to give. Something else, or an adaptation to that task that we've been doing, is asking our students to assess themselves what answers, student answers, should be awarded. So we never shy away from showing them the grade descriptors, although sometimes they're wordy, so we rephrase them to make them a bit more friendly. But this is a similar task where we show them a bullet point, 3 answers, and we tell them, you've got 20 seconds to decide with the person next to you which one is a 2 mark, which one is a 1 mark, which one is a 0. And then we have those discussions with them. It's a chance to also identify misconception and making sure that why this was a 2 mark, why some might be only 1 mark or 0. So again, all of that is available. We explain with them what may not be accurate and so on. All right. And now I'm going to come to the point. So when we've done all the works with making sure they understand the bullet point better, and by the way, obviously this is not the miracle solution, but it's one step. I can't share everything that we do, but that's one way forward. It's about showing them that their answers really need to be a lot simpler than they think. So first, we show it to them through how to do good opinions for bullet points that require an opinion. Because like me, I'm sure, look at the answer I have on my screen now. So something, mon opinion, les matières, c'est super, is someone that would try really hard, but thinks that they have to reuse all the words from the bullet points. Then it makes a really clunky structure that still communicates, but it's not great in terms of structure. And also, we know students have better knowledge and can do better. So we demonstrate to them what is not a so great answer. And then we show them, look, you could have done that way better. You had all that language. So when they say ton opinion, you don't have to reuse that word. Just give me an opinion. When you have activité préférée and raison, I don't need you to use those words necessarily in the answer, although you could, but be careful of your structure because of the word order. But perhaps just saying j'adore le foot car c'est amusant is enough to get the marks. So we're really telling them, just focus on that opinion. I like something because it is, because our students are excellent at it. And we show them that throughout different bullet points, even when they don't understand, because I don't understand Colonie de Vacances, particularly foundation, we tell them you can still give your opinion and fool the examiner into making them believe that you knew what it meant by just giving an opinion, reusing the word from the bullet point, and then obviously justifying it with a very generic adjective so that if it was a person or if it were something, it would still work. So we drill them that, and then we do practice with them. Oh, that's one particularly at the minute I'm working hard on students. Avantage and désavantage. They want to do an avantage, say, sometimes I have say, which is great, but sometimes I don't have it. So you have that clunky structure that I have on my screen. Then I tell them, no, just tell me, I think exams are interesting, but they're also difficult. That's an advantage. That's a drawback, and that's enough to get the 2 marks. So we're trying to convince them simpler and basic language will get you more score in the role play. And then we do that again with them, but this time without our modeling. But we also show them that they can use opinion even when a bullet point doesn't require an opinion. So, comida rápida, un detalle, they can give me an opinion. And for all of these, an opinion would work. So because we know our students are stronger with opinion, we are now recommending that whenever they can, that's what they need to be doing. And I'm sure you have similar situation in your school because students ultimately at the end of 11 are really, really good at expressing their opinion. I'm going to continue with role play now, and I'm going to talk about improving the quality of students' questions because that's the next barrier for us. Their questions are not great, and particularly in French and Spanish, to be fair, but in French even more so because the complexity of question structures in French. So our solution that I'm going to show you, and I'm sure you've got the same, is we just teach them 3 to 4 question starters that would work with most bullet points. So I'll show you the task on the screen, and I will even invite you to challenge me to tell me that my question starters wouldn't work with all the examples I have on my screen. But we have to acknowledge that some role plays are formal or informal. So we are teaching them both ways, although I am really aware that even if the students in a formal situation was using the informal way to ask me the question, it would still communicate. So I would not be able to penalize them for them. But we want them to get it right for the last 5 marks they get for their language. So we do teach them as well the formal questions. And with those question starters, we've seen a massive improvement in the quality of the question of our students. Sometimes it makes some awkward questions. So I've had students asking me, tu aimes la pollution dans ta ville? But it communicates, so it gets 2 marks. It's just a funny question. And sometimes you will get questions that will make you laugh, but I think generally what's important is they feel more secure asking me a question with those question starters. So that's what we've been doing. Any comments or any questions on role play so far before I move on to Photocard?
You'll read afterwards about the preparation, but nothing particularly about the role play.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great ideas.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to talk about Photocards. Now, Photocards, I told you, I presented you earlier our data. Actually, our students do really well at it, and they actually love describing pictures. We teach them an acronym. Someone earlier in the chat mentioned it, and that's what we do as well. The exam board recommended it, so that's what we do. But even when they do great photo description, what we've noticed is they just spend too much time on it. So it's been a barrier for us because they then don't have enough time to prepare other stuff.
I'm resuming the recording of Julien has had a slight problem with his internet, so I'm now going to be doing the clicking. Can you all see the screen which says speaking photo card?
Correct.
Right, okay, I'm ready.
So as I was saying, our students are strong with photo description, but they're not good with the timing. So we've been identifying that and working on making them better at timing. But another thing that we're struggling with, particularly in French, is their lack of manipulation of present because of the present continuous or lack of present continuous in French. So our foundation students, we just teach them il est or elle est en train de plus infinitive, and it's worked well. So if we move on from that, I'm just going to show you a couple of slides that you'll be able to revisit on your own. This is the sort of modeling that we do with our students to show them what are the structures that we need. And there's a variant on the next slide of this task, just because we need to model what we want students to do before we expect them to produce it. And we always encourage them to look at the different elements of PALMS it covers, because students, particularly in foundation, they sometimes think that the photo in the writing and in the speaking are the same. So we really need to nail with them that they cannot do sur la photo il y a for the speaking. But then when we feel that we've modeled enough, we provide some, so here you've got some activities of production, but still scaffolded. So that's a rock climbing activities where they have to take a phrase from the beginning and then they go up and take the next phrase and then move on up. And it's a nice control activities, because at this stage there is a right or wrong answer. So we can identify misconception of grammar for them before we make them produce without support. So in the next slide, you will see it's still provided a bit of support, the sentence starters. Some of you recommended it in the chat earlier, but with less modeling this time. They still have to produce some language on their own. It's just showing them how to use the key structures. And then when that's done, really it's up to them to produce the language. So on the next slide, it will be produce a photo description on your own. But at the start, we recognize we don't recommend 3 minutes. We put the timing, but we always start the course at 3 minutes and then we reduce. Currently, we're in March. Students are not allowed to do it under 2 minutes. So we're really, really nailing that, because if they do it more than 2 minutes, they're not going to do good answers somewhere else. So you'll see in the resources that I'm going to share, loads of repetitive slides just to help you get students get better and faster at it. It's not better, but just faster, because it's really needed. And then after that, what we have an issue with our students is they're not able to spot the tense questions and also their poor conjugation skills. So what we are providing as a solution is helping students identify better the tenses, but also teaching them systematic verb conjugation. At this stage in year 11, I can't teach the steps to each of the tense again. We've done that since Key Stage 3, and if it hasn't gone in, it's unlikely to go in at this stage. So we do grammar differently. That's on the next slide for you. First of all, because this is speaking, I'm allowed to do shortcut to grammar, because actually what I need my students to know is if the question is in the present tense, and the bullet and the question in French and in the Spanish are always in the informal way, then the verb in French is always going to sound the same. So I don't care if they put the extra ending for the tu form, because I'm not going to hear it. So I just tell them, you borrow the verb, you just remove that tu and put je. For the past, obviously we've taught them the steps, but they don't always retain them. So we teach them a quick shortcut. If you see tu as and a verb, you just change the tu as into j'ai. If it's tu es, it needs to be je suis, but then you borrow the rest of the verb. And you can do the same for the future, which is on the next bit, where you just have to replace the tu vas into je vais. And then in the conditional, it's even better. It's tu voudrais into je voudrais. And that has helped quite a few students who just simply can't access grammar, but can still be accurate with tenses. But it's not enough to tell them that. We then drill that practice. So on the next slide, you will see a task where we show them what a verb could look like in the bullet points. And we teach them, if you had that verb in the bullet point, what should it look like in your answer? And we make them prepare it even before they draft an answer. So tu aimes, j'aime. Tu étudies, j'étudie. And we drill that over and do it for weeks. But we don't just do it as reading from the card, because we know that there are 2 unprepared questions. So they also need to be able to change a verb accurately by listening. So that's the activity you have at the bottom, where I would read out a verb. So for instance, tu manges, and they'll have to write je mange without seeing the input from me, because they need to be able to do the verbs by just listening as well. And then on the next slide, we also tell them what to expect, because there's a lot of things that students can expect. First of all, we know there are 5 questions, 2 unprepared. The first one is always qu'est-ce qu'il y a sur la photo? But after that, we tell them there's always going to be a question either in the past or in the future, so expect it. The next 2 questions are in the present, one will be an opinion. And in the prepared question foundation, everything is in the present. One will always be an opinion as well. For higher, it's a bit more interesting and it's a bit more important for them to anticipate, because they will get 1 question in the past or in the future and the rest in the present. But it also means that they can anticipate in the unprepared question what tense they're going to get. So although they don't know the question, we tell them, if you had a past question on the card, prepare 1 or 2 verbs. In the future or conditional, you choose, and pick verbs that are so generic that it would work for any questions. And that way, that last minute we tell them to use for preparation, that's what they're doing. They're not trying to think what the question is going to be. They prepare a verb well conjugated. So moving on from that, then we show them also ways to identify in the question what is the tense, because it's not enough for them to know how to conjugate and to use that system. It's about identifying them, and we tell them to do it on their practice paper that we give them. So it's about, and that's relevant as well for the writing bullet points, circling the verb so that they notice it, put a code to identify what it is so that we can see they identify the right one. We want them to do that in mock 2, because then if they identify it wrong, we know we can intervene with them to tell them, oh, you've got a misconception about tenses. So we make them do it for the mocks. And then preparing 3 verbs for that question, even before you draft your answer. So if there is an example in there, yes, if you carry on, so that's a Spanish example, this is the verb, and then we will tell them, put 3 verbs that are really, really, generic, and that will work for you. And only when you've done those verbs, you start then drafting your answer around it so that it's more accurate. So then we practice that over, because a lot of the resources I'm going to be sharing, there's a lot of practice exercise. And then really it's time to do an exam question. So on the next slide, you will see we always have a very clear way of laying out when it's time to do exam question, and we do it in exam condition. We just remind them of some key things, but we don't give them language anymore, and it's time for them to tackle it. And we do it in exam time condition. So we tell them, photo, you only have 8 minutes, because in preparation time, I don't want you to spend more than 8 minutes. And you'll see loads of those cards available to you in the resources I'm sharing tonight. So moving on from that, I'm going to talk about general conversation briefly. What I noticed this year, and I don't know what was your experience with getting stuff remarked in September, is I felt that the exam board had higher expectations than before. And I felt, for instance, that our students were particularly penalized if they were not doing narration. Although they were communicating and giving details, we sort of felt that there was almost a cap. So if you press on there, Helen, we've noticed generally, and I can't say the truth because I've tried to ask AQA about it and they told me it's not the case, but I noticed in 2 schools that I was getting remarked that students were capped at a 6 in content if they simply didn't have narration and they were just communicating normal details. So this year, we are preparing students to do narration, a lot of it. We're teaching them sequences, and we are also realizing, telling teachers, if they don't do it, nothing tells you not to prompt narration with a follow-up question. So I'm going to show you that in the next slide. So first of all, we show them, look, this is a question that would be perfect for narration. This is a model answer from a student, but it's not great. It's got details, but it doesn't really have a nice structure for narration. Then we teach them the sequences that we want them to have. So we show them what we want, and then we tell them, rewrite this answer, reuse all the language. We just want you to put that in a well-narrated answer. And there are loads of slides as well like this, where you can practice that with your students, and it removes slowly the scaffold as well, so that they do it on their own. And then moving on from that, we also teach them to be able to change time expressions, because the problem is then they're going to want to do too much narration and they're going to become repetitive. So it's about, one, having synonyms, but also being able to move a time expression to different tenses. So how would time expression in the present become time expressions in the past or in the future? And then how the verbs would also change, so that we're always drilling this accuracy of language in there. So these are just the answers. We always provide the slides with answers, so it just speed teachers with the correction time in the lesson. And then from then on, it's just practice on that again and again. Sometimes giving them, for instance, here is an answer that you've produced or that you're preparing for this topic, but it's in the present. But really, you could, a good exercise for them is to, can you write it in a different tense? Would you be able to do that? And then that's, again, manipulation of language, reinforcing time expression and conjugations. Right. And then, as I said to you, if your students are not narrating, ask them to narrate. And I'm going to do that. I've never done it before, but now that I feel that the examples are capping, I am asking in my mocks to my students, when I have just one answer, I'm saying, et après, et ensuite, et finalement, et le soir, ou et dimanche. And I'm teaching them that now, so that in the exam, they feel confident with that. And that's also my follow-up questions that fit nicely with my conversation. So make sure you prompt students to narration, because we're noticing capping, particularly in higher. Then other barriers we have in general conversation is lack of variety of language and structure. And again, examples have denied that to me, but I felt last year there was another cap that happened there. We noticed many students who were accurate with tenses, but if they didn't have complexity and variety of language, they never got more than a 5 or a 6 in that range of language. So if you show the next bit, Helen, we're trying to teach them synonyms for it. And let me know if you disagree with that, but I do think capping has been happening more than previous years. So we show them an answer, for instance, and we tell them, okay, that answer, when you try to paraphrase it into a different tense, we showed you how to change the verb and the time expression, but you can't always reuse the same vocab. So the exercise there is change the vocabulary in there, so you use different vocabulary for your answer in a different tense. And that provides a practice for doing variety of language. And then there's many more activities like this that we drill with students for practicing variety and synonyms. So the next one in there you'll see is just making sure that things like conjunctions, time expression, adverbs, opinion, phrases, and sequences, they just have a lot more synonym for them, because that's the things that students repeat the most. So we drill them with them. We give them about 4 or 5 of them, and they come as a list in there. And tell me if you've got more that works really well for you. But then we force our students not to repeat those bits, because if they don't repeat those bits, then other parts will be a bit more lenient about repetition, because it won't sound as repetitive. And then something we love doing with them is petit bac. So that's the next activity. You might know that game in French where you have categories, and I give you a letter, and you have to think of a word or a phrase that has that letter as a sentence, as a starter letter. I wanted to play that with you, but given that I've lost a bit of time, I'm not going to do it here. But there is an example on there. So with the letter M, if we click on here, you'll see that's the sort of thing we do, or P, yes, and then we reveal answers. And that's a good way of drilling synonyms with your students so that they get better and better at not repeating their language. In the next bit, then it's manipulating complex structures. As I said to you, I think that that's been a downside of our students, particularly when they try to improvise. They simply don't have complex structures, or they manipulate them really poorly. So we do teach them some to memorize, but we also, I'm going to show you now in the next slide, we recommend some. And I'd be really interested to find out which one you recommend. So could you please put in the chat the top 5 complex structures that you train your students to use? Because I always love hearing which ones are used in different schools. So that's, yes, I love that one, Sarah. I agree. Bien que ce soit is a great one. We teach it as well, and many more. On the next slide, I'm going to share mine. Again, there is not an exhaustive list, but you'll see them. Oh, actually, I've put them in the writing. So I'm going to share them soon. 40 word. Okay, I'm going to try to go as fast as I can. First of all, there is no problem with the 40 word. I'm sure you agree. The only thing is when they don't understand the bullet point, but what I'm going to share to you is not a new thing. You all do it, I'm sure. It's just teaching them to express an opinion with the bullet points. So moving on from that, yeah, we can move on from that one because I think everyone knows it. That's the structure we teach them. And then we teach and drill it and drill it and drill it so that in writing or in Photocard or in general conversation, in a role play, they can always deal with something that they don't know and fool the examiner. And we like to use that word because they love feeling that they are smarter than us, and it really motivates them. So then we just practice that with different bullet points. We use sometimes words that we know they wouldn't know. So this is foundation slides. That's the kind of words that they tend to miss. But we do try to teach them also to manipulate say, or I mean it is or they are accurately, because we think that's quite important, even more so in the writing perhaps than in the speaking. But in speaking, they would communicate even if they didn't use the plural form. And then moving on from that, yes, that's our little reward to them. So we tell them, well done, you fooled the examiner. They're never going to know that you didn't know. Translation, I told you, this is one of our biggest targets in our federation, and it's lack of vocabulary. But I had a really nice exercise for you in there that we did with our schools, and it really helped unlock teachers before mock 2. That was spotting patterns. So if I'm going to present in the next slide, yes, if you go there, all the translation, I've put them together on the next slide, and I encourage you to look at spotting patterns, but I can't do that now because I've lost a lot of time. So Helen is going to show you the answers that I've spotted, but I'm going to talk to you through them. First of all, you can see in there it's color-coded. We have noticed very regularly that obviously there is always going to be one sentence in a different tense. Most of the time, it has been a past tense. But you'll notice that there was something really naughty about 2019, where there was both a future tense and a past tense. It's never happened since. But could it happen in 2024? Could we be back to having 2 sentences in a different tense? Something that is worth noting is that there's always opinions. So you can see, I like, I don't like, I like to listen, I adore. There's also always some irregular verbs. So you can see, I go, I do, I go, and then sometimes naughtily into a different pronoun. So we do need to prepare our students for it, though the on form would be perfect in French, for instance. And then finally, there is third person singular in the present tense is an important one. And you notice as well, there is always there. Other things I color-coded in gray is not really clear. There is always location. They have to say where something is. So we have to teach students to be accurate with that. And it's a problem because it's preposition, it's hard, but we have to try, all right? So those are patterns for you. And in the next slide, I've put the higher ones, but yes, I'm gonna move on from that now. I'll invite you as a little homework to spot the patterns yourselves, okay? 90 words, I think I'm gonna do okay. So problems we have, they don't know the bullet point, but again, we reuse the same strategy as the 40 words. So you give me an opinion about it. It's fine if you just give me 10 words about it. You'll compensate everywhere, anywhere else. And then it's lack of confidence. Now, I'm sure you will agree with me that it's not at this stage that students can't produce the 90 word. They just feel demotivated by it. They think it's too much. So our strategies that we do with them is we tell them, just do it as a 40 word. Write 40 word to start with, because that's likely to get you a good, really close 50% of the marks in there. Rather than giving up, do it that way. And then I'm going to show you something else as well for tenses that is very similar to what I showed in the speaking. So moving on from that, we show them how that looks to do a 90 word, the 40 word way. So we tell them, just write 10 words for each bullet point first, skip 3 lines each time. And then you get this. So that's a Spanish example. So that's 38 words. And if they want to give up there, I wouldn't be angry at them because they'd probably get half the marks. But then we tell them, you're not that far off to get even more marks. So we tell them now, see whichever you can give another 10 marks. Carry on along the way. Perhaps do a contrasting opinion or an additional opinion, even if it's repetitive. If your language is weak, I'd rather you give me repetitive language than nothing. Maybe add me an extra activity if you can. So that looks like this. And now all of a sudden, I think I have 78 words. Is that correct? 77, not bad memory. And then we tell them, okay, with that already, you could secure a really good score. But if you really want to push the next way, we teach them ways to reach the 90-word count by doing always three things. You gain 3 words by always saying who you do things with. So do it and just varying it. You always gain 2 to 3 words by saying where you do things. And then you gain 2 to 3 words by saying when you do things. And that, all of a sudden, with the answer I just showed you earlier, means that students meet the 90 word. So I've got an example in there, and that's the perfect word count I need. So obviously it's not a miracle, but if you have students disengaging still at the 90 word, just encourage them to do it as a 40 word. There's still the barrier of understanding the bullet point. I fully get that. And they are more complex than the 40 word bullet points, but just get them resilient to produce something at this stage. Okay, moving on from that. So this is an example. I said we want students to be accurate with their tenses. So we do the same work as I showed you for the photo. It's identifying which bullet point is in what tense, writing the codes to us so that we can identify when there's mocks or practice that they are getting them right. Otherwise, we need to tell them, actually, you have a misconception. And then it's telling them you're not allowed to write until you've produced 3 verbs that are accurate. Because often what we notice in production with students, even when they get it wrong in their writing, it's not that they don't have the knowledge of grammar. It's that when they're writing, they don't think about grammar. Grammar is a totally different skills to them. And it's hard to bridge that knowledge into writing. But we found that by telling them to do it first, when they can just think about grammar, makes an impact then when they produce, because then we tell them, just plug them in. And if you're going to use any other verbs and they're wrong, at least you will hit the mark of generally successful or mostly successful, and you're going to get the marks. And then we would give them sentence starters to start, because another problem with the 90 word is the fear of the blank page where they don't know how to start. So we give them initially some sentence starters and tell them, have a go at it. All right, moving on from that, then we have so we time that little practice, and then it's exam question time where we tell them, okay, do that little planning work on your own, identify the tense, prepare your verbs. We give them 5 minutes to do that, and then an extra 10 minutes to produce an answer for it. And we don't say it's just 10 minutes, but we always keep 5 minutes for checking their work as well, because otherwise their work can be very inaccurate. And we tell them how to do so. So in the next slide, you'll see what we force is not a nice word, but we encourage strongly our students to do, which is check your work and show me you're checking your work by highlighting the verbs that you've used to show me you know where they are, putting an O and a G like an examiner would do on your opinion and justification, circling your conjunctions so that you're making yourself aware and you notice if you've been using one too many times, underlining your opinion phrase again, just to see last minute, oh, am I repeating one too often? Oh, no problem, I know another one. But they might not be conscious when they're writing that they're repeating. So if they do that work of checking, they can then improve that work. And the last one is always forbidden words. We always tell them, if you have those words in your writing, it's time to erase them, because those words belong from the bullet points and they're verbs in the second person singular. They have no place in your writing, so you must take them off. And that tends to do the trick. So moving on from that, I don't know what I'm doing with the time. 150 words. So 150 words. Obviously, unknown vocabulary in the bullet points is a main barrier for us, but lack of planning. Our year 11, even when they're confident, they just want to write. And I understand why, because they get to write such interesting essays in English, in history. They write really good answers in science, and they get really, they are encouraged by those teachers to write really, really interesting points of views and so on. And unfortunately in MFL, although we have those tasks, it's not really, we're not interested in how interesting their point of view is. We really just want them to communicate effectively. So it's not a great thing what I'm saying now, but we are trying to tell students, think less about the great things you want to tell me. Instead, tell me things that you know you can secure in language that you have mastery of. So it might be simpler, it might not be all the ideas you had, but it's going to communicate effectively. And we tell them to do that through doing a plan. And obviously the very famous thing that AQA has been recommending, unpicking bullet points as well, to prevent students from going off-piste as well. So I'm going to model that in the next slide. So here are two tasks that I took, for instance, and we model to students how preparation should look like. We keep it minimal because, as I told you at the beginning, it's really hard to convince students to do a plan. They don't want to do it. So we used to have really nice bucket plans with all these boxes to prepare, and they just didn't want to do them. So now we tell them, okay, just plan two things. We beg you, just do two things for it. And the first one is, please unpack those bullet points and put some key ideas without phrasing them in a sentence. So there's an example on here on the screen that are going to appear. So for instance, that one is really easily split into different bullet points. So avantage and then disadvantage, but start putting your ideas in there so you're thinking about them. And you see that you don't need too many words when you split them because it's really just 30, 35 words. And then also by splitting the bullet points, you are more conscious about making sure you're hitting the tenses that may otherwise not always be in the bullet points pointers. Same example in there, and that's their little plan I want. Some students like to do it in English. We don't recommend it, but this is still better. I would rather they had a plan in English than none at all. And then moving on from that, we still, yes, that's another one before I show you the tenses one. It's their lack of knowledge of the mark scheme. So if we move on to the next one, we show them the mark scheme to convince them that that's why they need to do a plan and to show them that they need to include complex structures. So showing them in the next bit, we share that with them and we unpack it. And some schools do a great job at doing a student-friendly version of that. I don't have that for you there, but really we just highlight to them what we think is the most important part. And then as promised that I said in the speaking I will share with you is my star structures that I teach my students. First of all is the list I have of them, because many teachers always ask me, Julien, like, what are complex structures? It's so hard to define because the exam board actually don't give us an actual list of what they are. And then very often we think they have to be stuff that is from A level, and I don't think that's the case. Complex structures can simply be conjugation in different pronouns, or difficult verbs that are irregular, reflexive verbs, or negative structures in a tense that requires word order that is tricky, using double verb structures or modal verbs, using subordinate clauses and relative clauses are complex structures. Using and you can see that in the Exam Pro website. I have an example after, but actually what they identify a complex structure sometimes is an interesting conjunction, and then obviously idiomatic expression as well that we know our students love using. So on the next slide, I have some examples of what we give our students. And
Sorry.
Although we do teach them subjunctive, I don't think it's needed. It's needed in Spanish, I agree, but not in French. So the next bit, you will see that's my ones. Then I try to drill them and I have a Quizlet for it. And then I have a Bluecat. By the way, I don't know if you guys know Bluecat, but I love it. They love it more than Quizlet. They don't like Quizlet. So Quizlet is homework. And then in class, I do Bluecat. I put my phone on a hotspot. Everyone gets their phone out. And then we compete on Bluecat because you can do a race and they love it. And I drill the vocab of these complex structures with them. I don't teach them the grammar of it. I just teach it as a chunk. And I don't tell them that they need to know all of them. I tell them to pick their favorite ones. And then, and I'm sure you'll have better ones, so please share them in the chat so I can do improve my version in there, and I'd be happy to revisit it with you guys. And then I do, as I said, I drill it through Bluecats, which is the next slide. I invite you to have a look at it. It's really engaging for students, and you can use a Quizlet quiz to use it. It's got different gaming. Also, don't shy away from using Languages Online. It's a great website to practice complex structures. They've got a lot of the ones that I like. So that's the next slide. You have an exercise that I stole from them. Sometimes the issue is they're a bit complex, but I pick what I want from it, and then I work with the students on it. I provide extra help. Like you can see, I've identified which tense they should be using. But Languages Online is a really good website if you want some gap fill exercise, and students can do it at home because it's auto-mark. So it's a really, really good one to use for complex structures grammar. And then the planning, as I said, is important in here. So this is what we engage them to do before they write. First of all, annotate or write on the side your complex structures that you want to use and not forget as a tick list. You don't need more than 3 to 5. This is my example from earlier. So this was my unpacked bullet points. And here are some of them. So initially I might suggest some for them, and I tell them pick 3, 4, maybe 5 of them, but really 3, I will be happy with those. And then once you have that plan, only should you be starting writing. So in the next slide, we have practice on your own. And again, that's exam question time. We remind them of our key things that we want them to plan before they write. And we allocate specific time, 5 minutes, where, I'm walking crazy in my classroom to prevent anyone from starting to write on the line. They're only allowed to write on the side and show me their plan. And they puff and they're not happy and sigh, but I'm like, no, it's plan time. And then after 5 minutes, it's writing time. And then I don't know what I have next. Oh, yes, that job. And it's hard to convince students to want to reread their work after they produce it. They feel like, okay, that's my baby. I've laid my egg. I don't want to see it anymore. It was painful. And I understand, but I tell them the problem is if you stop there, you will lose mark because there are things that you would be able to spot if you just take an extra 3-minute checking your work. But it's the same one as what we suggest for them for the 90 words. So identify your verbs, your opinion, your conjunction, your opinion phrases, and your complex structures, and then make sure that you identify any repetition so you change it last minute. And finally, I believe that I'm on the last leg of my presentation. Recommended material, that's all the things that I've made available to you from tomorrow. We have 2 sets of lessons available in both French and Spanish. There's a really long PowerPoint for all the things that I've presented for speaking, and then for writing with loads of activities, with loads of guidance, and then practice, and more guidance, and then more practice. You'll see it's really repetitive, but we change the level of challenge. We repeat it all the time. It's an 8-week program. So you'll see there's a lot of work in there. The correction is always available. I apologize if you do spot some typos because we've been producing them in frantic ways, but please let me know if you spot anything. So they're available in there. And yes, we call them Target 5 because we were trying to help our students who are not currently on a grade 4 or 5 achieve it. So it's a program for foundation. However, the speaking is the same in higher. So we've been using the speaking version for our students, as well as the 90 word in the writing with them. So you'll find a lot of practice activities, and I hope you'll find it useful. And they're adaptable there in PowerPoint. So I think that's all I have for tonight. Exam Pro, that's the last bit I want to encourage you to do. If you have it, there are great model answers that are highlighted, they come color-coded. So if you still have questions over what do they consider complex structures, what is details, what is blah, 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 have a look at the model answers for example, because that has definitely shaped or reshaped a little bit what I thought was complex structures, for instance. So I encourage you to do that. Really, really good. And a demo is available as well from their website. And Exam Pro is not very expensive. And I'm here now for question and answers if you have. And I apologize and I made it on time, but it's a really, really late session. And I'm really sorry for the cut halfway through as well.
Oh, you've done brilliantly. I mean, the amount am I on mute or anything? I don't know.
No, you're not. I can
Not.
hear you.
Thank you so much, Julien. That was superb. And you are so generous. All of this work that you've done that you're sharing with us is great. I'm conscious, of course, that a lot of people couldn't join us tonight who wanted to, but they will be getting access to the recording. So I know this is going to be watched by lots of people. And I'll be making all of those things available. And especially thanks so much for these resources you're giving that we can click through to show students. We've got comments from people here from Nasira. That was very informative. Some great ideas I'll use. Thanks so much for your generosity. Danielle saying great resources. Look forward to using them with my students. Sarah's saying, but lots of thanks. Amazing session. So I think people have been quite quiet because they're watching and they're scribbling. And I think for all of us, me included, I mean, tomorrow I've got a lesson at 12 o'clock and I'm now going to stay up half the night rewriting that lesson, I think.
Oh, I hope not. I'm sure you had done a fantastic job for it, but I'm glad if it's been useful. As I said, I've sent them to you as a zip folder because they are really, really big resources. But by all means, and also I would really value feedback and criticism as well, or any additions, because, you know, I steal these ideas from my teachers. I come up with some of them. There's some of it that is mine, but again, I would love to hear more because everyone benefits when we share. So again, if you have resources that you want to share with me, love to have them because I just learn from other people as well. But I hope that you will find what we've put together with Mathilde, because it's not just me writing those lessons. It's been Mathilde and I tirelessly writing those lessons at the weekend. And I really hope that they benefit not just our Harris students, but everyone that is willing to use them.
Thank you.
And as I said, in Spanish and French, sorry.
Well, you are a great advert. You really are for your federation, the fact you're sharing it with us. And yes, you'll see that there are some ideas which you've written in the chat, but I think that idea of sending things to you as well, of other things you can use. I know this is the last year. We've got next year as well, haven't we? This specific.
Yeah.
And can I just say that although right at the beginning, you're right, it's sort of fooling the examiner, it's getting through, but actually people memorizing these things and knowing these techniques, they will remember them for a very long time and they will be actually quite useful. So I think we don't necessarily have to always be too apologetic about it.
No, I agree. I mean, I'm unapologetic about it at this stage of the year because, you know, otherwise it's too late if I don't accept that I have to play that little game as well.
And it's at this stage of the year that I think they're listening to us the hardest, isn't it? They're aware. They're nearly there. Thank you ever so much.
To the person in the chat that just said you have some nice booklet, yes, absolutely. I'd love to see them. That'd be great. So if you can share them, fantastic.
And just one thing I would say as well about complexity for the AQA, they do, if you look at the separation of the higher level structures, you know, the grammar is divided into foundation and higher.
Yeah.
The higher is their complex. And also if you look at exam reports, they will particularly say which the things are that they identified as being good. So, I mean, I've made that into a mnemonic of ticks upon ropes or something where each, but anyway, I'll send it to you.
Oh, yes, please, because that's the question I get the most in our teachers just don't know what it looks like. So I would love to have your list if you've been looking at that, Helen.
I mean, I'll write it very quickly now. So I think some people think it's going totally over the top, but ticks upon takes you up to a level 5. So that's your time phrases, tenses, intensifiers, infinitives, connectives, subordinate, adjectives, different pronouns, opinions, and negative.
Mm-hmm.
The ropes can't even remember what they are, but it's things like gosh, I'm not very good, am I, to remember that. Oh, the last one, the subjunctive, you can do it. Oh, the E is the on.
I like that one. It's a hard one to manipulate as well.
Yeah, the P is the perfect infinitive. Après avoir.
I love that one.
Object pronouns.
And those are tough. Those are really tough.
The R is, and then I added 2 more. I put QT and DV because they say they like the use of the word quelque. And and showing that you can say toutes sortes and tous les jours.
Yes.
And then DV stands for using the Dupree structure and the
Oh, yes.
And I suppose in a way for me, I just thought in the, when you're tense in the exam as to what you're going to do, just writing those letters down. I mean, I couldn't remember them myself, but it might make them remember some of them. So your idea of, when it comes to the exam, whatever it is they're going to try and put in. So, but I'd love to see, I think you've got absolutely plenty there, loads, but it's nice that everybody's sharing.
Yes, I agree. Well, I really thank you, Helen, for sharing all of that and for giving me the platform as well to share what we do. We are really keen to share with everyone, even in the future, but even more. So we would love other opportunities to come back and share more and hear from others as well.
Yeah, we must let you go, but I've just seen that Danielle Bourdet has said, what about answering with force? Danielle, I've made you co-host. So if you'd like to open your video or your audio to tell us what force is, FORCE, I'd be very happy with that. Oh, here we have fact.
Sorry,
Opinion.
I was typing it. Yeah, I tell my students to use force, answer with force, and that's the fact, because they have to answer. They have to give at least one fact in the tense of the question to follow by an opinion, which they need to justify. So they give a reason. And establishing a contrast to use
I like that.
connectors and example. And I'm not happy with E, because example is not what I want, but I wanted the force. An example of what they did or what they're going to do, so that they introduce a new tense.
Oh, that's
very good idea.
And that is sort of what gets them the mark, really, the marks.
And actually, I think that bit about the fact, because I've sometimes seen lists of posh expressions that people can litter it with, but they're not actually saying anything. You do actually need content, don't you? You need to be communicating something.
And it's quite good if you have a really low ability student, because one fact is enough, if it's je vais au parc, and then they can build up gradually. And that's something that I found was quite powerful, because it's easy to remember. They all love doing force, and it's not a long series of letters that you can't remember.
Also, it goes in the sequence that you would say the things.
Yes, although I tell them that only the F word is fixed.
All right. Okay.
Because then they can give, they can justify other things, and so they know that they have to give the F word, the fact, first of all, and then in the tense of the question. So that normally has worked quite well. And Julien, the books that I was saying cover a lot of what you've mentioned, because when I wrote them for Pearson, so they're available for Edexcel and AQA, but when I wrote them for Pearson all these years ago, we looked at all the stumbling blocks, tried to unpick all the difficulties. I would say that the target 5 is a little bit ambitious for the lowest of the lower ability students. It's still a little bit a little bit optimistic, but everything in the book was addressing barriers.
Oh, I know those target 5 books you're mentioning.
Right. Okay.
Yes, we love them. They are fantastic resources, and we've been using them for years.
So you are the author of this, Danielle.
Sorry?
You are the author of these books.
Yes. Well, I did the writing with a co-writer. Yeah.
Yeah.
They are an amazing resource. So yes, indeed, if you feel that my session had bits of it, it's because you've inspired a lot of the techniques that we teach. Absolutely, we've been using those books religiously since the 2019 when we started to look at them, I think. But
that's good to hear.
Yeah, I mean, for a while, I think, because this was, rather than buying textbooks, we were actually buying those books because we felt they were a better practice for students.
Well, I think it's more focused practice, isn't it?
Yes.
It's
So those
narrowing
were-
down to the essential, because we went from the criteria, you know, the exam criteria as well. So it was really hitting the nail on the head, or trying to anyway. But as I said, I found that it's a little bit, I think
But I'm ambitious as well with, you know, so and actually I feel like we've stolen your title by calling Target 5-hour lessons, but I just find the title really powerful for teachers to understand what we're aiming for. And I agree with you. The lessons you're going to see, if you have a look at what we're sharing, it is also ambitious. It's not always easy to get a grade 5, to be fair. So there is some element of it, but they don't need to do it all to get a 5, to be fair. And you'll have students who will be able to reach that. So yes, but thank you for having inspired us for many years with those books, because I can generally tell you, you know, first of all, the title of our lessons is taken from, you know, those books that were really, really helpful when we were just trying to decipher what those new specs were, because at the time the specs were very different from what we knew. And we really had no clue what we were doing. And those books taught me how to teach GCSE. At the time, I was a head of department in Peckham. And as I said to you, I said to my school, I don't want to buy a textbook. I can do the interactive textbook on my screen. I want my students to have those books at home. They're the best one. I didn't even want the revision books, because, you know, those ones that we usually see, they have a lot of it, but they're really big. But those were just such great practice. So thank you for putting them together.
Wow. Woo.
So there we are. I think we need to link to this part on LinkedIn, Danielle. So you could go to Julien, you could go to Danielle Bourdet's LinkedIn and write a little thing to commend her as the wonderful author. I've always loved your work, Danielle.
Thank you.
Okay. So shall I stop the recording now? And I'll stop it now unless anybody else has anything to say. Okay, well,
All good.
thanks ever so much, Julien.